Hey guys, my name is Dice Rollin'. Today we're going to be taking a look at perhaps a lesser known and underrated vampire movie, based on the novel by Whitley Strieber and written by Michael Thomas and the late James Costigan. The Hunger was directed by the late Tony Scott and was released on April 29th, 1983. It focuses on the developing love triangle between a doctor studying aging and a centuries-old vampiric couple. Following its release, it received pretty mixed reviews. A number of people thought it was all atmosphere and mood with no substance. Others praised it for being a classy sort of vampire movie, with a different take on the subject. In the decades that followed, it earned a cult classic title. So without further ado, this is my review of The Hunger. The movie begins in a club where Bela Lugosi's Dead by the Bajas is being performed. I would be lying if I said I didn't get severe gender envy from this right here. Lurking in the shadows are John, played by the late David Bowie, and Miriam, played by Catherine Deneuve. They end up taking a couple, played by Anne Magnuson, and John Stephen Hill, home for what could be perceived as a swinging time. However, both the couple and the audience are in for a surprise. I give them props for having a very convenient crematorium at their real home. Elsewhere, Dr. Sarah Roberts, played by Susan Sarandon, is working to find a way to, as she puts it, slow down the internal clock. This is mainly to help those with the disease that accelerates physical deterioration. However, she has just had one of her experimental monkeys kill and eat its companion. I imagine that's a bit of a setback. Back with John and Miriam, Alice, the girl they've been tutoring in music, played by Beth Ehlers, has arrived. Unfortunately, John isn't quite up to today's lesson, as he hasn't been sleeping well lately. Miriam makes a visit to Sarah's book signing, and even where she works, to speak with one of her colleagues about what's going on with John. Apparently, this is something that's happened to other lovers of Miriam's. They begin to age and deteriorate rapidly for some unknown reason. John even visits Sarah's office looking for help, but Sarah doesn't seem to believe what he's saying, and leaves him for a meeting. She officially has evidence with her remaining monkey that they can tamper with the internal clock. In the time that she's gone, John ages rapidly. When he finally finds her, she sees exactly what he had been trying to tell her, but he's a little ticked off with her and leaves. While sitting at home, Alice shows up to leave a note for Miriam, letting her know that she can't attend their next lesson. John ends up killing her despite the fact that she was going to end up being Miriam's future companion, as an attempt to restore his youth. But this doesn't work. When Miriam returns, John asks her to kill him, but she can't release him from this. The thing about being a vampire and having such a thing happen to you is that it's never ending. And this is why Miriam has a whole attic filled with coffins of her still technically alive lovers. The following day, who shows up at Miriam's door but Sarah? She's not above doing some digging to find John, apparently. However, now isn't a great time as Lieutenant Elegriza, played by Dan Hedaya, has arrived to ask Miriam about Alice. Fortunately for Miriam, the lieutenant doesn't feel there's a need to worry about the missing girl. Over the next few days, Sarah finds that she's frequently thinking about Miriam, so she visits her again, and this time Sarah and Miriam swap blood. Later on, it seems that Sarah's boyfriend Tom, played by Cliff D. Young, already knows that something is up. He urges her to see a doctor so their colleagues do some tests.
The spooky part is, it isn't human blood.
While the rest of them have no idea what or where this strain in Sarah's blood came from, she does.
What have you done to me?
Naturally, being a doctor, she's not easy to convince of vampires. But since the blood hunger she's dealing with isn't easy to ignore, she returns to Miriam, who lures a man to the house. There's a new problem though. Tom has shown up at Miriam's house looking for Sarah, and Miriam instructs him to where Sarah is, warning him that she's not well. I think that's an understatement. Though Sarah attempts to make Tom leave for his safety, he refuses.
It's not nearly as difficult as you imagine, is it?
Now that Sarah is officially immortal, Miriam tells her the rules of this new life. However, it seems Sarah has other plans. Miriam carries Sarah up to the attic, like she had done with so many of her previous lovers. But it seems that something is different. Each of her ex-companions has risen from their coffins, in a very zombie-like fashion. Interestingly though, it doesn't seem to be in a revenge-seeking kind of way. It's very much Miriam's past that comes back to haunt her. Through this hysteria, Miriam falls to the ground floor, and her eternal youth leaves her. This in turn frees her lovers, allowing them to finally rest. Sometime later, Lieutenant Algreza returns looking for Miriam, and is instead greeted by the agent in charge of selling the house. He explains that the Blaylocks are dead, and the profits of the sale of the house are going to a research center / clinic. Wink wink. We're shown that elsewhere in London, Sarah is actually still alive, and has companions of her own now, and Miriam has found herself in much the same place that all her former lovers had been. And with that, the credits roll. The Hunger's plot is very different from what most people are used to when it comes to vampire horror movies, especially from the 80s. For this reason, I think a number of people who watched it didn't know what to make of it. When I watched it for the first time, I was left confused and uncertain as to what to take from it. Obviously, there's a lot of things going on here aside from vampirism. It's a story about relationships and intimacy, for one. It can be taken quite a few different ways, honestly. It has an extremely dreamlike quality that makes everything seem more romantic and ethereal than it otherwise would be. The plot itself is rather simplistic, but it's interesting nonetheless. Catherine Deneuve, Susan Sarandon, and David Bowie are the main standouts here. Deneuve enhances the ethereal quality of her character and makes a convincing ageless vampire. She understood that it was more than just seeming mysterious and sexy. She also had to convey Miriam's loneliness and pain of losing who were supposed to be her eternal lovers. She makes you feel sympathy for Miriam, while also questioning the ethics of her choices, and whether or not you would do the same in her shoes. Sarandon brought a logical and grounded feel to the character of Sarah. She gets pulled into the supernatural world, and struggles to cope with what she wants to be, versus what she is now. Bowie was able to match Deneuve's ethereal quality, as well as provide his own. The two of them interacted very well. When it came to portraying John's struggle with suddenly aging, he made the character sympathetic and quite sad in a way. I've heard people refer to this film as a perfume commercial or music video, and in a way they're right. It's extremely stylized and atmospheric. You immediately know what you're watching is from the 80s, but personally, I don't think that's a bad thing at all. Each setting is a little bit different, while keeping the overall dreamy vibe throughout. The Blaylock home feels like a grand mansion-like estate that's been around for as long as they have. As soon as you step inside, it's like a world separate from everything else in New York. The atmosphere is something I don't feel I can compare to anything else. It's unique and strong in its presence through the screen. All the special effects are practical, and typically kept to a minimum, with the exception of showing the extreme aging of some characters. The blood is pretty fake looking and paint-like, but that could have been a sort of nod to Hammer horror. The legendary Dick Smith is primarily responsible for the makeup looks, and what can I say about that hasn't already been praised before? I like the look of the work done on John, even if it's a little over the top. In all fairness, it's supposed to be. It's still convincing enough to not pull me out of the film. The score, composed by Michael Rubini and Denny Yeager, enhances the ethereal and dreamlike quality of what's shown on screen. It also adds a chill sharpness to the violence when it happens. The soundtrack as a whole combines classical with contemporary music of the time. It's not something that you would likely expect, yet it works. It may not have a lot of songs that you'll remember and want to listen to regularly, but what it does have stands out. With all that being said, I'm giving The Hunger 8 out of 10 bloody thumbs up. It's a strange case, but I think it works rather well. It presents itself as a rather serious movie, but as with many things from the 80s, it can't be taken too seriously. It can seem a bit shallow to some, but I'd consider this as more of a visual film, in the same way that Suspiria is. There is a story being told, but it's what you see that's the most important element. It's not necessarily loaded with action, or the type of moments that you would expect from horror, and could even be considered a slow burn. Given what other vampire horror movies were prevalent at the time, The Hunger deviated too much from that style, and thus people couldn't quite place it. Now, as I mentioned, it's receiving the praise and appreciation that it should. It's not quite for everyone and may even be considered an acquired taste, but if you're like me, then you'll enjoy it. I would recommend The Hunger to stylish horror fans, vampire fans, those who enjoy a horror film that likes to break stereotypes, and anyone who likes David Bowie and the Bahas. I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a comment down below telling me what you think of this movie, and if you have any suggestions for horror movies you would like to see me review in the future. You can support the channel through my Patreon, where you would get exclusive and early access to videos like this. See you later.
We're done to live forever. There's no release, no end.